So to follow in the footsteps of the Rodevals, Logues, Landinos, and Sawyers is to be near the epitome and the peak of my craft. And the amazing successes and often dramatic failures, always with a large dose of hubris, have characterized our approach to economic development since we laid out the very first planned community in North America 375 years ago. So
Matthew, you probably brought up for the first time in 50 years the name Maurice Rodeval in a New Haven press conference, the guy who designed, the Yale professor who drew the plan for urban renewal. Looking back on what he did with the benefit of hindsight, what did he do right, what did he do wrong, and what are you going to learn from that in the job?
So there's a 2-hour answer, Paul. So very briefly, what he realized was that cities, like businesses and people, have to live in the future. They have to adapt themselves to changing circumstances. He saw the car coming. He saw, even before the federal highway plan was initiated, he knew that the Department of Highways was looking at a series of widened arterial roads connecting the country. He wanted to make sure that New Haven wasn't bypassed by that. And so his understanding of New Haven as continuing in a new kind of node that wasn't sort of forced because of where people were, or where energy was, or all of the different things that sort of created the city in the 19th century. He wanted New Haven to adapt and to be modern. Clearly the mistake that he made was to not understand, because he was trained in the sort of then sort of modernist views of the French in terms of how cities should become pristine and antiseptic towers floating over peopleless expanses. He misunderstood what was special about New Haven in terms of the streetscape, in terms of the housing. I mean, he wasn't incorporating the sort of Jane Jacobs view of what actually made New Haven spectacular. Now, I've talked to one of the other names there, now departed, Landino, and I asked him once, why did you guys, because he was the city engineer and then he was development administrator, why did you sort of tear down all of these buildings? And what he said was, when we looked at a 6-story brick building, you look at it having been rehabbed with all the money in the 80s and the 90s, you look at it as this sort of nice, yuppie place where you live in Worcester Square, as we were talking at the time. He said, I looked at it as a cold water flat with rats that I had to struggle up, 3 families living in an apartment. I couldn't wait to tear those things down. I regret it now, but I didn't understand that these very houses that now are what make Brooklyn, Brooklyn, what make Back Bay, Back Bay, I didn't understand that they could be rehabbed and they could have a new life. So the mistake that Maurice and Landino and everybody made was to understand that the car would change everything, but that the very dialogue that the city had created to have many workers be close to the smelting plants and the rendering plants on Legion Avenue could be turned around through new kinds of reconstruction, through new kinds of loans. Remember, the banks weren't loaning for rehab in those days. The federal government wasn't giving any money for people to rehab. They were only giving money to demolish because the government was on sort of a view that cities should be like a Corbusier view, which is what Rodeval was trained by. So, long answer to a really important question. He got the idea of change right. He got the ability to use the tools that he had wrong, and he used the wrong tools. They demolished and tried to create a new world that would be compatible with the car. In many cases, it just didn't work, and it turned out to be a disaster. And those cities that didn't have the smart people that I named and did nothing have turned out now to have all sorts of assets that we all wish we had. I mean, fortunately, we still have a lot.
Any tools you're going to use to get it right?
Any tools that we're going to use to get it right?
In 2014.
So, as I've said, and I will continue to say, the fact that we have a mayor who can communicate and can listen to everybody in the city is something that, for a variety of reasons, we've just never had. And whether it was the Hill Houses and the Irish immigrants in the 1840s to the complexion of the city today, if you can't listen to everybody and understand what everybody's dreams are, you won't be able to adapt yourself to the changing future that incorporates where each person's dreams are. I will have somebody who is going to be listening, who knows that instinctively. I will not be allowed to make the mistakes that previous people did, who were inventing a new technique, but were doing it, quite frankly, both in the ivory tower, literally, and I should also say, I don't want to speak for the mayor, but the fact that she is a graduate of the architecture school, which in many cases built the tools that both destroyed and rebuilt the city, you know, is a fascinating opportunity to have that dialogue at an intellectual level. It's beyond me, not as because I'm not a planner and whatever, but to be able to have that dialogue with deans and students and professors who study this question in a much more, you know, better way than I have, but she'll be able to speak that language. We haven't had that before either. We've never had a planner and an architect as a mayor, so that's something else. We won't make those mistakes again.